The year 2000, Y2K. This was a year that was really hard to keep up with album releases, with very few gateway bands on major labels at this time, and a large roster of influential artists now on independent labels. And with that, number one, we're going to start off with Pantera, Reinventing the Steel, Elektra Records. This would be their 9th album, but their 5th major label release, and yet their final album ever made. This is definitely something the mainstream needed during a time of shitty knockoff nu metal bands, and Pantera was willing to go down swinging, and this album went gold in the United States. The singles on the album would be Revolution Is My Name, Goddamn Electric, featuring Kerry King from Slayer doing some noisy guitar shit at the end of the song, which was actually a recording of him doing a sound check in a bathroom backstage at Ozfest, and I'll Cast a Shadow. And like all Pantera albums, this is a good start to finish album. Other songs that didn't make it to the record, such as Immortally Insane, appeared on the soundtrack to Heavy Metal 2000, and Avoid the Light, which appeared in the film soundtrack Dracula 2000. A cover of Ted Nugent's Cat Scratch Fever appears in the film soundtrack Detroit Rock City. 2 Black Sabbath songs were also recorded, such as Hole in the Sky and Electric Funeral, which appears on Nativity in Black 2, a tribute to Black Sabbath. And the instrumental track, Pre-Hibernation, appears on the SpongeBob soundtrack. Yes, SpongeBob. The music video for Revolution Is My Name was directed by Jim Van Bever, who is known for his work in horror films. Definitely get your hands on the 20th Anniversary Edition, which features the said non-album tracks minus Pre-Hibernation, and an alternate Terry date mix of the album. This album was a soundtrack for my transition of leaving California and moving to Arizona. I remember driving my 1984 Chevy Cavalier with my Discman and my shitty speakers, so I think this album kept me sane during this new surrounding of mine. And speaking of the new surrounding, I think this is the first purchase I made when I moved to Arizona, and this album will be Armored Saint Revelations, Metal Blade Records. This would be their 5th full-length album, and their first album since 1991's Symbol of Salvation, which also features the same lineup. The song The Pillar was originally written for Hellraiser 3, but did not make the cut, but instead the band appeared in the film, performing Hanging Judge from the Symbol of Salvation album. The track What's Your Pleasure was co-written by Dave Pritchard, the band's original guitar player. And this album is a start-to-finish album, but probably my favorite. I can't decide. Sometimes Symbol of Salvation makes a tie with it. But my go-to tracks, I guess I would say, would be The Pillar, After Me, The Flood, Den of Thieves is probably my favorite, and Deep Rooted Anger. And this is the only Armored Saint album to come out during John Bush's time in Anthrax as a current member. And this is while they were busy doing SOD. Up next, Crowbar, Equilibrium, Spitfire Records. This would be album number 6, and with final album with bassist Todd Strange. This would be the only Crowbar album to feature drummer Sid Mons. There is a music video for the track, I Feel the Burning Sun. When I first purchased the album, it took a couple plays for me to get into it because I was used to the older Crowbar sound, but over time, this one really hits me hard. And I think this is one of their best albums, but also the production on the album is heavy as fuck and it's crystal clear. My favorite tracks on the record would be Down Into the Rotting Earth, Buried Once Again, Glass Full of Liquid Pain, and Command of Myself, but the whole fucking album. At the end of the album, there's a cover of Gary Wright's Dreamweaver, which is also pretty fucking good, believe it or not. And it was said to be a joke by the band, but the way it came out is pretty fucking stellar. And the other joke on the album, it's a hidden track of Inagata Davida by Iron Butterfly as an acapella. You could kind of skip that, it's just kind of goofy. But the rest of the album is fucking tits. Speaking of tits, well, maybe I should calm the fuck down. Here's another awesome album. Corrosion of Conformity, America's Volume Dealer, on Sanctuary Records. This would be their 6th full-length album, and final album to feature original drummer Reed Mullen before his return in 2010. And also, rest in peace, Mr. Reed Mullen. This album also features a guest appearance by Warren Haynes from Government Mule and the Allman Brothers, providing slide guitar on the track Stare Too Long. This is also a start-to-finish album, like said by many, but I'm going to go with Diablo Boulevard, Double Wide, Zippo, Sleeping Martyr, and Congratulations Song. And how can I forget the track 13 Angels? And if some of you could tell, there was no amplifiers used for this record. All the guitars and effects were plugged straight through, and the drums were also electronic. And the style of this album is more of a heavy southern rock sound than a sludge metal or punk sound that they're known for. And most of the songs are actually radio friendly. I remember this album was a pain in the ass trying to find at the record store because it wasn't filed under Corrosion of Conformity, it was filed under COC. And up next, we got Dio, Magica on Spitfire Records. This had marked the band's 8th studio album, and it is also a concept album that was meant to be a trilogy. The album's lineup also features guitars Craig Goldie, bassist Jimmy Bain, and drummer Simon Wright. My go-to tracks on the album would be Turn to Stone and Fever Dreams. And in my opinion, the style of this album is kind of like a return to their 80s sound, but heavier, and even at times darker too. And up next, we have Halford Resurrection on Sanctuary Records. This would be a solo debut album, and all due respect to Judas Priest, but I think this is better than what they were doing at the time. Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden even makes a cameo on the duet of The One You Love to Hate. And the lineup consists of guitarist Pat Lockman, who ended up being the frontman for Damage Plan. And yes, another start to finish album, but my go-to tracks be Made in Hell, Locked and Loaded, Nightfall, Silent Screams, Cyberworld, Slow Down, Temptation, and Drive. Next we got Iron Maiden, Brave New World, Sanctuary Records. Album number 12 by the band. This also marks the return of vocalist Bruce Dickinson and guitarist Adrian Smith, with this lineup being a 6-piece. The album features 2 singles, The Wicker Man and Out of the Silent Planet. I also dig the title track to the record. There's also another version of the track Wicker Man which features different backup vocal tracks, and in my opinion that version should have been on the album. The style of this album is similar to the album Peace of Mind in my opinion, which is a good restoration of that classic sound they were carrying. And now I'm glad I'm finally on this album. We're talking Iomi, a self-titled debut album on Sanctuary Records. Each track features a different vocalist, such as Ozzy Osbourne, Philip Anselmo from Pantera, Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins, Billy Idol, Peter Steele of Typo Negative, Henry Rollins, Ian Astbury of The Cult, Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters, and a couple more. There were a few tracks that were recorded that never made it to the album that feature Philip Anselmo and Billy Idol, and maybe one day in the future these tracks will surface officially. Some of the tracks feature drummer Bill Ward from Black Sabbath, bassist Lawrence Cottle, who was also a session member of Black Sabbath, as well as Brian May from Queen on guitar. My guess is they'll put out a box set like they did for Geezer Butler that might feature all these rare tracks. And speaking of rare tracks, we got Caius, Muchas Gracias, the best of Caius. Even though it's not really a best of, it features 5 songs from the albums, but most of it consists of B-sides and rarities. In my opinion, they could have left out the 5 album tracks, they could have put in other rarities, and the cover of Black Sabbath Into the Void. But this is a must-have for any Caius fan. This is probably released to fulfill a contract with Elektra Records. And speaking of contract fulfilling, we're going to go with Goat Whore, The Eclipse of Ages into Black, their debut album on Rotten Records. And the lineup features Sammy Duet on guitar from Crowbar and Acid Bath, Ben Falgout from Soylent Green, bassist Pat Bruders, who is playing in Down and St. Vitus now, former Soylent Green guitarist Ben Stout, and Zach Nolan on drums. The style of this album would be considered blackened death metal. This album also features the best snare drum I've ever heard probably. The production is overall raw but really good quality as well. And even though I celebrate the band's whole catalog, this is probably my favorite album they ever put out. And on the topic of Acid Bath and contract fulfilling, we got Agents of Oblivion, their self-titled album on Rotten Records. This would be their only album, and it features Dax Riggs from Acid Bath on guitar and vocals, as well as Acid Bath guitarist Mike Sanchez. The style of this album would be more psychedelic swamp rock and southern rock, as well as elements of doom metal. My go-to tracks in the album would be Phantom Green and The Hangman's Daughter. The album also features a cover of Acid Bath's Dead Girl, as well as the T-Rex cover, Cosmic Dancer. Sadly, the band split after touring for the album, but thankfully Dax Riggs has been releasing solo albums ever since. And a quick note, we gotta add Alice Cooper's Brutal Planet, the title track, and the song, Blow Me Away. Actually, it's Blow Me a Kiss. Well, Blow Me is in the fucking title. We'll just go with that. But it's a good fucking album. It's heavy. I think it's a great fucking album. And fuck all the lackluster reviews. And then we got AC/DC, Stiff Upper Lip. The title track and Satellite Blues are probably my go-to. And of course, like their later material, it's not a great album, but it is good. But you can't just skip a fucking AC/DC album. You gotta throw them in, regardless. Thank you for checking out Mean Street Journal. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the fucking bell. Mean Street Journal is on YouTube and Spotify. And also go to tpublic.com for Mean Street Wear for all your offensive apparel needs. And if you don't dislike my slab of useless information, feel free to make a donation. The link is in the description. And if you got any suggestions, hit it up in the comments. Just don't be a dick.